Good evening. You're listening to the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them, with your host, Dan Zupansky. Good evening. This is the program True Murder, and my guest this evening is Diane Fanning. And when Diane Fanning was 9 years old, a man asking directions stopped and grabbed her by the arm, trying to drag her into his car. An oncoming vehicle honked their horn, and her would-be abductor let go of Diane and fled the scene. She had, however, memorized the car's license plate number, and when police caught up with the man, he was also arrested for the murder of an 8-year-old girl killed just a month before. The dramatic event sparked a lifelong interest in the psychology of the criminal mind and led directly to her career as a celebrated true crime author. Published since 2000, she has written 3 books of fiction and has 10 true crime books published by St. Martin's Press. I want to welcome to the program Diane Fanning. Thank you very much for agreeing to this interview, Diane.
Good evening, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. Just going to introduce your book, Baby Be Mine, just with a brief synopsis, and then I'll start asking you some questions to explain to our audience this incredible story. 36-year-old Lisa Montgomery was a mother of 4, but still wanted to have more children. She claimed the last time pregnant she miscarried, and now she was pregnant again and desperate to have another child. On December 16, 2004, in Skidmore, Missouri, Montgomery strangled 8-month pregnant Bobbie Jo Stinnett and cut from the womb her baby. Lisa Montgomery fled to Melvern, Kansas, and managed to pass off the abducted newborn as her own to her unsuspecting husband and family members. Thanks to Amber Alert and a forensic examination of computer correspondence, the baby was found safe and sound, and Montgomery was arrested. At trial, was she suffering from mental illness or simply a cold-blooded killer? Welcome to the program, Diane. Let me ask for this very first question. You have written about other cases. I had mentioned that you have 10 books under your belt. What specifically made you decide to write about this particular case?
Well, Dan, sometimes your interest in a case is fostered by some little serendipitous coincidence. And I was initially drawn because December 16th, the day that Bobbie Jo Stinnett was murdered, was also the day that I lost my grandmother. It had been many years before, but it was an anniversary, and I was thinking about her that day. And so I was riveted with this thought of another death on that day. And then when I started listening to the first breaking news about this story and heard it was a cesarean abduction, I'd never heard of a crime like that before. I never knew it had even happened. And so that is what got my interest. And, of course, then when I went to research the crime, I found out that although it is a rare crime, there had been enough of them that the FBI had done a full study on that particular type of crime and that criminal.
Now, where were you living at that particular time?
I was living here in Texas.
In Texas, okay. And how far from Skidmore, Missouri is that in terms of miles for our audience?
I have no idea, but it was too darn far for me to drive. I flew to Kansas City and drove north from there.
Okay, now in terms of the coverage of the story itself, how far was it reaching in terms of, you were in Texas, was it a big story in Texas? How far-reaching was the story itself?
Yes, I think it was big everywhere because it made CNN News, and of course it was on Nancy Grace, and it was pretty much all the national media covered it because it was a spectacular crime with a particularly happy ending. I mean, Bobbie Jo was dead, but the baby survived. In many of these cases, the baby died as well. In this case, it was a little different, and the things worked right to recover the baby very, very quickly.
Okay, well, you're getting a little bit ahead for our audience that is not familiar with the story, so let's go back a little bit and outline for our audience the killer herself, Lisa Montgomery. What kind of person, as in terms of once she was an adult, what was she like as a person, and what was some of her background?
Well, she came from a family, and I think this is important, where she had a serial series of stepfathers. And her mother had 5 children. And every time just about she had a child, it seemed to be to get married or to keep a marriage from breaking up. Her mother never did anything like Lisa did, but she taught her that pregnancy and partnership were 2 things that were interlinked. And if you could get pregnant, you could get a man or keep a man. And so, unfortunately, along the way, one of those men that her mother had married sexually assaulted Lisa when she was a young teenager. And I think that scarred her a lot. And combined with the dysfunctional family she was raised in, it made someone who wasn't exactly emotionally stable. But I think there was a deeper side to her character. I think she was very much the narcissist, perhaps a malignant narcissist. Everything had to be the way Lisa wanted it to be, and that's what led her down this road. And she was married, had children. Her husband left her. She claimed to be pregnant. He married her again. The pregnancy sort of disappeared. She claimed to be pregnant again. But both of these pregnancies happened after she had gotten a tubal ligation. So I don't know how anybody could have thought she was pregnant there. But her first husband kind of got tired of all the game playing, and finally the marriage ended for good. And that's when she met her second husband. And she went through a couple of phony pregnancies with him before they were married. He married her thinking she was pregnant, but then she claimed to have a miscarriage. Another time she claimed to be pregnant with twins. And then finally, when it was obvious that he just about had it with her, that was when she realized that this pregnancy had to be real. And she targeted the woman she was going to take the baby from.
Now, how many, you talk about this as an incredible feature, a psychological feature, where this woman is obsessed with holding on to holding on to relationships that are going sour by constantly being pregnant or expecting a child, and so this is the feature of her adult life. But how many children does Lisa Montgomery have herself? What kind of mother is she? And basically, what kind of mother is she, and how many children does she have before this event happened?
She has 5 children, just like her mother, and she seemed to be a very sporadic mother. Sometimes she seemed to do the right thing, but other times she would just lay on the sofa and read, and if the kids wanted something to eat, she'd throw something together, set a pot on the floor, and they would eat on the floor. She went from acting like a mother to acting very disinterested and very bothered by her children. There is a difference between a newborn and a tiny baby, that they look at you for everything, and they don't really question you. When children get older, they're not giving as much of the positive feedback that a narcissist needs. And so she did get a lot from that, and she got really more from infants than she got from anyone, adult or any of her own children.
Now, you talk about narcissism, but was there any diagnosed psychological labels attached to her behavior? Was she seen by psychologists or psychiatrists, or is this sort of a diagnosis after the fact? Was her mental illness prominent enough for anybody in her family or her ex-husband or anyone to officially have had her see someone? Is there any record of her?
Not until she was arrested.
Okay. Would you say... Well, go ahead.
If you look at narcissism as being on the same spectrum as psychopathy and see progressing degrees, there's different levels of narcissism. And Lisa checks in, I believe, at the level of malignant narcissism, where you are willing to do anything and disregard anyone else's rights or anyone else's life to get what you feel you need.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I want to have a good understanding of what narcissism means in this context. And when you're talking about a psychopath, for those that still don't know what that is, it's just complete devoid of conscience. People are able to do things that normal people would not be able to do. Okay, I wanted to ask you as well is that when you mentioned in the end when she did have her husband and she did steal the child, this had to be first done with her pretending to be pregnant and convincing people that she was pregnant. Now, how did she fool people like her husband and family members and girlfriends that she actually was pregnant? You talked about the tubal ligation. Well, how did this particular husband not know? Can you explain how on earth anyone could have been fooled by her, or to what extent did she fool these people, and how did she go about it?
Well, when I first started looking into this case, that was something that really confused me. I mean, particularly a husband. How can you trick a husband into thinking you're pregnant? Well, it's, for one thing, her husband Kevin did not know that she'd had a tubal ligation. Her first husband knew, but her second husband did not.
Okay.
And so that was part of it. Now, he didn't particularly want any children because he had hers to raise. He had his own children by a previous relationship. But, he's a family kind of guy. He married her in the first place because he thought she was pregnant. So he was committed for that part of the relationship. What happens, according to the experts I talked to at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, is that in most all of these relationships where a cesarean abduction occurs, the husband or boyfriend has lost interest sexually in his partner. And he when she says, "I'm pregnant," he embraces that because that means he does not have to touch her again. He's got an excuse. I don't want to hurt the baby. It's not the real reason why he's not being intimate with his wife, but it is an acceptable reason. So they're doing that, and meanwhile, she's making sure that her husband never sees her completely naked. So you've got a dynamic there where both people are trying to keep physical space between one and another. And so realizing that she is pregnant then becomes whether or not she's pregnant, it becomes more difficult. And you complicate that with some of these women are able to swallow air in a way that makes their stomach very rigid. I don't know if you've ever touched the tummy of a woman carrying a child,
yes,
but it's much harder than somebody's fat belly, But if you swallow the air in the right way, you can make your stomach pooch out and be hard, so that somebody with a minimal amount of experience could not be sure. And with her husband, she'd say, "Oh, look, feel this." And, all he wants to do is get his hand away from her. So, he doesn't. With other people, when she told him to do that, I would suspect she probably waited till she had something gurgling in her stomach and, they just touched it and felt it and, just accepted it. And she was wearing the pregnancy clothes and she was talking about it online and it was really a wonderful act she did. I mean, she was playing a part in a play. She pulled it off very well, but unfortunately this was reality. And the end of the line could only have one end result, and that was either her being found out or someone dying for her to have what she needed.
Wow. Yeah, it's an incredible level of deception, to say the least. Now, let's get to Bobbie Jo Stinnett and how Lisa Montgomery came to meet her. Tell us a little bit about Bobbie Jo Stinnett. Who was she? How old was she? Where did she live? And how on earth did Lisa Montgomery come to meet her? And then these incredible, fateful turn of events occur?
Bobbie Jo was a lovely, sweet, small-town girl. I mean, the town she came from had a population of 347 people. So, this was little Midwest girl, and she loved animals, always loved animals. Had pets of all sorts when she was a little girl, did barrel racing on horses as a teenager, and she worked, when she was in high school, she got a part-time job working in a pet shop, and then when she graduated, she continued doing that. And she also got into rat terriers. And although she wasn't, she didn't go to college or anything, she was still a very smart girl, and she was on her own studying the genetics in breeding the rat terriers, and she was finding things that could go wrong in breeding. People were calling her, as young as she was in her early 20s, they were calling her to get advice on breeding different pairs together, and she would tell them what the downside was of it. I mean, she could figure it all out because she knew this stuff up one side and down the other. And part of that was being involved with the rat terrier group online. Mm-hmm. And she went to these little get-togethers, dog shows through that group, and that is how she met Lisa Montgomery. Lisa had rat terriers too, and she bred them. And they ran into each other at one get-togethers at one time. There's a photograph showing the two of them together, but they're not standing next to each other. They're both in the same group photograph. So I don't think they were real close by any means, but they had some interaction. But Lisa knew that if she was going to take Bobbie Jo's baby, she had to be a little sneakier than that. So what had happened is Bobbie Jo had initially said she was going to have a boy, but the woman in the group who was supposed to have a boy had a miscarriage. So suddenly Lisa is saying she's going to have a girl because she found someone else in the group who posted their pregnant picture online, and that was Bobbie Jo. And it's a horrible thing, but a pregnant woman should never post her picture or talk about it in an open forum online. She should be allowed to, but it simply isn't safe because there are not only just people bent on cesarean abduction, but there's people bent on infant abduction too who will take advantage of that. The list of do's and don'ts on the center's website tells you, you don't put your picture online. You don't put one of those cute little pink or blue storks in your yard saying we've had a baby. That's like inviting trouble. And it's a shame that the world is that way, but it just is.
Did the
Bobbie
website
didn't know this.
Did the website already have those warnings on there, or that advice on it itself, the chat line? Or?
No, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's website had that.
Okay.
It's not particularly common knowledge, and she thought she was in a group of like-minded people, and she was open and sharing with them and trusted them. And someone came on with an email address of Fisher for Children and contacted a friend of Bobbie Jo's and said she was looking for a puppy. Mm-hmm. And he got her connected with Bobbie Jo. And Lisa set out to go to her house to pick up the puppy.
Now, how long was Lisa Montgomery looking for rat terriers? I mean, you said she had been breeding rat terriers as well.
For years. That just happened to be something she took advantage of. Yeah, it wasn't something she initiated for this purpose, but it was because she was in a group with people that were pretty open with each other and shared information. She saw that as an opportunity to take advantage of.
Okay. Now, you're going to jump to a question that I was going to ask anyway. And I wanted to know what the significance of that fact was that you were speaking about, that you talk about, you do include in your book other cases of child abductions that are very similar to this.
Yes.
Killing a woman and stealing the baby. Can you go back just before we go into the crime itself and tell me what Lisa Montgomery knew about another crime that was very, very similar and what its significance is and was in this particular case?
Well, there was a woman named Effie Goodson who had a year earlier killed a woman in Oklahoma to steal her baby. And that did not go well. Effie was caught, the baby died, and Lisa was aware of this story. And she told a friend, well, she got caught because she was so stupid. And what Lisa saw from that is that you don't steal a baby out of the same town where you live, and you don't steal one too early to survive. And you come prepared to do the excision of the baby in a way that will keep the baby safe. They found that in addition to that, she had studied online videos of cesarean sections of goats. So she was prepared, and she brought the materials with her that she would need.
Now, what you were talking about, she brought everything that she needed. Let's go to the actual meeting. Let's go to, we've already set it up that they meet through this chat line. They're talking about she wants to buy a rat terrier from Bobbie Jo Stinnett. Now, continue from there and give us this the fateful turn of events that really this story is centered on.
Well, she left her home in Melvern, Kansas, which I think is about an hour outside of Kansas City. And her route would have taken her up to Kansas City and then past St. Joseph's, Missouri, and then up into that northwest corner near Iowa. And that is where Skidmore is, and that is where Bobbie Jo lived. And she came up on her small little street to this little unassuming white bungalow and walked up to the door. And no one really knows what happened when Lisa was at that door. When Bobbie Jo came to the door, she was expecting somebody else named Darlene Fisher, and there was someone that had to at least have looked slightly familiar to her. Did she notice right away, forcing Lisa Montgomery to force her way into the house, or did she just let it slide, thinking she saw this woman somewhere but didn't think anything of it? We don't know. But they did end up in the spare bedroom, which was used for a little kennel for her rat terriers. And it was there that that Lisa took out a rope and put it around her neck and strangled her till she passed out. With Bobbie on the floor, Lisa got next to her and made the first cut to remove the baby. At that point, Bobbie Jo came back around, got to her feet, unbelievably, bleeding the way she was, and struggled and fought until she was strangled again. And then Bobbie Jo finished what she needed to do, took wrapped the baby up and took it with her and fled the home and started driving back to Topeka, where she called her husband and said that she just had a baby. They were evacuating the hospital, and she wanted him to, she couldn't drive all the way back by herself, and she needed him to come and pick her up at this fast food place. So he did, and he was delighted. He picked up her and the baby, and then one of their older teenage kids with a license drove the other vehicle back home. And he was thrilled. I mean, he was one of those guys that, you just love a baby like a lot of us do. And they got up the next morning and they went to the community hangout cafe and took the baby around table to table. They went by the minister's house and showed off their little baby Abigail. And the preacher's wife said something about, well, if she was just born, why is her head so perfect? Which is typical of a cesarean birth child. And Lisa said something that says, oh, all my children are like that. And her husband corrected her and told her, please. And so they went on doing this, and then they went back home. And while they were in the house, the police came to their door.
Okay, let's
looking for the child.
Okay, let's stop you right there because I want to go back just a little bit. Bobbie Jo has been killed and murdered, and then the horror is just unfolding, obviously, while Lisa Montgomery is pawning off this newborn as her own, and it's actually working. Her husband and other family members, and you say they're going around to the community store and to the minister's home, and they're all looking at the baby and accepting it as hers, at least so far. Now back at the crime scene, at the horror scene, I should say, who discovers the body and then what happens?
Oh, that was the worst thing. Bobbie Jo's mother comes into the house to see how her daughter's doing. How long after the murder? Probably only about an hour.
Okay.
Or less. It was a very short amount of time. Her mother just worked a couple blocks away. And she came in, and there she found her only her only daughter, laying on the floor, bloody, looking like her stomach exploded. And she called 911 and immediately tried to do CPR. When the sheriff showed up, he joined in helping her with CPR until the EMTs got there and took her off in an ambulance. But she was already dead. And that is when, it was after she was gone, actually, that Bobbie Jo's mother said, "Where's the baby?" And he said, "What baby?" And that's when they learned that the baby was missing. And then they had a problem with Amber Alert, because technically you have to have a description of the child and what the child was wearing and stuff like that in order to get an Amber Alert. But no one but the killer had ever seen this baby.
Wow. So how did they get around that?
There were some strings pulled with a congressman helped make it happen so they could get out an Amber Alert. And it was the Amber Alert that actually was the big help in finding the baby, because someone, the person that set up the sale and someone in North Carolina involved in rat terriers too, were able to give information about the possible communication on the computer, and by doing that, they were able to track down through the internet service provider the location of the phone call, of the emails. So they knew exactly where the house was at that point. And they contacted the police in the first place because of the Amber Alert.
So it was not based on the forensic examination itself. It was based on just straight police work that had said.
It was both happening at the same time.
Okay.
The guy was analyzing the computer, the cops were talking to people and getting information, and it was like, it all came together all at once. So it was a combination of both things.
Now, how many hours between her murder and the police knocking on the door of Lisa Montgomery and her husband's home, questioning her about the baby that she had abducted?
Just less than 24 hours.
Less than 24 hours. So like you say, it's one of the true crime success stories. If there is a happy ending somewhat, this is one of those rare cases for sure.
And one of the oddest things was when the police came in to their home, They were sitting in the living room, the television was on, and the Amber Alert was scrolling on the bottom of the screen.
Wow. Jeez.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I read in your book that the husband was only briefly considered a suspect whatsoever, but give us the reaction of the husband and the immediate family, and then afterward you could tell us a little bit about the town's reaction. Melvern, Kansas is a small community as well.
Yeah,
and then,
yeah.
of course, we're going to have to be talking about what happened in Skidmore and the reaction in Skidmore itself, too. So.
Well, poor Kevin, I mean, he had no idea. As far as he was concerned, this was his baby. And the police were wanting to take his baby away. And it was like he couldn't understand what was going on because he really didn't know what was going on. Lisa did and pretty much gave up kind of quickly under questioning and prodding. She turned the baby over. But Kevin, I mean, even the next day, he called and asked when he was going to get his baby back. He really thought it was his child. So it was a very perplexing thing for him. But, he not only did he have an alibi, but the sincerity of his response was there. And, you talk to people who've worked with the men who have been in this position, and they said, a lot of people automatically assume that Kevin must have been stupid. But the bottom line is that they know of doctors, lawyers, and even a judge who went through the experience of a fake pregnancy that they believed. Some of them were cesarean abductions, others were infant abductions. But these husbands really believed it was their child because of the psychology in the relationship and their inability to even conceive of someone doing a crime like that.
Yes, it is pretty hard to even imagine, let alone comprehend. Now, there was other family members, wasn't there, if I'm not incorrect, wasn't there some of Lisa Montgomery's children from a previous marriage also in the home at the time when she tried to pass off the newborn? Yes,
and they bought it. I mean, they were only teenagers. I mean, Mom says she's pregnant. Who's going to question Mom and say, oh, you are not? It's like, here's the proof. She said she was pregnant. Even if we doubted her, here is the baby. And, teenage girls, particularly a baby, they go nuts, and they were just busy taking pictures of her and wanting to take turns holding her. And it was a very normal family reaction to the arrival of a new baby.
Now, obviously there was an incredible reaction in Skidmore, Missouri, and you have included in your book sort of the incredible trail of tears that has gone on, that has beset this town already. Maybe you can go into a little bit of, just briefly, some of the horrific history that has occurred in this small town. And I'm very curious, why did you feel compelled to include it in the story itself?
One of the reasons I felt compelled to include it is because this town is so haunted by its past and so paranoid about the outside world because how they perceived they were treated unfairly in the past. And it all really came to a head with Ken McElroy, and he was the bully of the town. And I imagine a lot of people have seen the movie or read the book about Ken McElroy. He was shot down dead in the middle of town in broad daylight, and although there were at least 36 witnesses, none of them saw a thing. And to this day, that happened 30 years ago or so? Probably more than that now, but more than 30 years ago. And yet, no one claims to have seen anything, and they still don't know with any certainty who shot and killed Ken McElroy. But he had been a horrible influence in the town. He'd been shooting at other people. He sent out an old man that was beloved by the town to the hospital near death. And he had a crafty lawyer who kept getting him out of horse thievery, other fraud, and just one thing after another, and he never went to jail. And the townspeople just finally had enough.
Now, what size town are we talking about? What would be the population of this town, so we can get a sort of an idea of it?
347.
Wow. Okay, very small town.
Yeah.
Okay, and you talked about this particular event being one of the events. Can you give me some more events in Skidmore, Missouri? The Stinnett family itself had so much bad luck. Again, to say the least,
yes,
understatement.
When I talked to people about the McElroy story, one of the things they said to me, almost universally, was, don't just tell about that. We're not the only one. This isn't the only crime here. You need to tell the whole story. And they were kind of passionate about that. And then when I went to one of the Bobbie Jo's grandmothers by marriage, and I sat down in her kitchen, and she said, it is horrible what happened to Bobbie Jo, but this family has had more than this happen. In the last 5 years, others have died. And she wanted that story told. So I took the story of her other grandchild who was beaten to death in domestic violence, and I took the story of another grandchild who had gone missing from his home, and police suspected he was abducted, tortured, and murdered by this sicko that they have him behind bars on child pornography charges, but they can't seem to pin any murder on him because he was very good at disposing of evidence. So, the people wanted these stories told, and I couldn't go into their community and take from them information and not give back something. And it was just fascinating to me to know the history of this town and to know how much sorrow was in this small group of 347 people. One family in 5 years losing 3 young people is unbelievable.
Right. Now, Lisa Montgomery was arrested and charged for, I assume, kidnapping and murder of Bobbie Jo Stinnett. What were the official charges that she was charged with?
There were a number of kidnapping charges. I think there were a couple of them because holding Bobbie captive was a kidnapping charge, and taking the child across state lines,
right,
and murder. So she. And that's what got her the death penalty, because there were the kidnapping with murder charges, and she was tried in federal court.
Now, the thing is, for our audience, there may be some people listening in Canada and some people in other jurisdictions other than the United States, and so laws are a little bit different, and court proceedings are a little bit different. Now, when we look at a particular case like this, most people will have to ask the question, despite the background that you've given that there is a lot of evidence of premeditation on her part, very calculating, why is there not at least the fact that she is completely obsessed with being pregnant, and that deception, and almost seems to be out of touch with reality in terms of being able to get away with such an incredible abduction? Isn't there something to be said that there may be, or there should have been, or could have been, a mitigating factor to fight the death penalty charge itself? In terms of the death penalty has to have, if you're going to not have a death penalty and have a life imprisonment imposed, there has to be some mitigating factors. Now, tell us a little bit about that.
You could argue that her mental health was a mitigating factor. The fact that she was assaulted sexually by a step-parent was a mitigating factor. But when it comes down to actually pleading guilty by insanity, the law is very narrow. I think it is a bit too narrow. For example, you take Andrea Yates, who drowned her 5 children.
Right.
She was, there were long records of her psychosis and her escape from reality. And while it was probably a fact that she knew what she did was against the law, she did not feel like it was essentially wrong because God told her to do it, and this was the way to save her children's souls. So, but still, the first time around, she was found guilty and given the death penalty. That's since been changed on appeal, but the bottom line was they felt the fact that she knew it was against the law put her in death penalty category. I strongly disagreed when she got that death penalty. I thought that was wrong because she did have a track record of serious mental illness. Lisa Montgomery, on the other hand, did not have that history. She had a history of being selfish and self-obsessed, but not of mental illness. And it is clear from the evidence of what she did and how she planned the crime for months and how she covered it up and believed she wouldn't be caught. This was premeditated. And it was obvious that she knew it was wrong, but she didn't care because it was right for her. And she didn't care that Bobbie Jo was laying dead because it gave her what she wanted. Not only did she have a baby, but she had a baby that had never looked at and imprinted on any other woman. So this baby would be hers, and no one could take that child away. That is what she believed. She was wrong in that, but that's what she believed.
Now, you talked about the trial, and you don't go too much into the trial at all in the book, and I wanted to ask you, first off, why you felt that it wasn't necessary to do that, and what did actually transpire in the trial in terms of the death penalty, and where is she in terms of the appeal now? And lastly, if you know anything about Missouri, what is their sort of track record in having the death penalty go forward? Say California, for example, is slow, and Florida is very quick. So where is Missouri?
This is outside of state jurisdiction. It is irrelevant because this happened in federal court. So this is federal law.
I see. I understand.
And the feds don't give as many death penalties as some states do, but they do give some, and they usually do eventually carry it off. I think their average is somewhere around a dozen years after the crime.
Okay.
But the trial being in federal court meant that nobody was allowed to come in with a camera or a video camera. There was no audio recording, no kind of recording at all, which is what usually happens in federal court. So
no transcripts available?
I imagine, but you know how much those things cost.
Sure.
Tens of thousands of dollars,
Yeah.
So it's just not realistic. And so, but she did. She was found guilty, and she got the death sentence. There has been one appeal that's gone through that she has lost, and although I don't know if a second appeal is commenced, there usually is a second one in a death penalty case. But because it's federal court, that just might be different. But I don't think so. I think there is one of them is a habeas writ and another one's new evidence writ. They usually come through with both of them. So I imagine that one is the second appeal is in early stages. But she's in a federal prison in Leavenworth.
Okay.
Kansas.
So let's talk about the happy aspect of this, and that is Lisa Montgomery named the young girl Abigail, but that wasn't her she has been named another name. So maybe you could tell what the young girl's name is, how she's doing, and give us a little bit of that success story right now with the young girl.
Well, the little girl, as I had said earlier, survived this brutal birth and was returned to her mother, and to her family, and to her father Zeb, and he hadn't really cared for the name Tori that Bobbie Jo had picked out for the baby, but he kept it anyway. And she would be, I guess, about, 5 years old? No, 4 years old now.
Okay.
And she, there was a little bit of a custody fluff up between her father and her maternal grandmother, but they worked that out in the courts, and the father does have custody, and the grandmother does get visitation. So she's moving forward with her little life and is really lucky to be alive. And it's going to be hard. Someday she's going to have to learn the whole truth about her mother and what happened to her, and that's going to be difficult to deal with. Yeah,
I can imagine. The thing that was another sad aspect of it, too, is that Tori's grandmother, Bobbie Jo's mother, ends up not being a big winner out of this as well, not only having the horror of finding her daughter killed, that there has been some animosity, we'll say, between Zeb Stinnett and it hasn't been smooth sailing for her to have access to her granddaughter. So.
No, and and that is very unfortunate. But when you think about when there is a loss of a child involved, there's really high emotion, and I think that all sorts of events afterwards are perceived in different ways by the mother who has lost a child and by the husband who's lost a wife. And I think conflict is unfortunately true. I mean, so many married couples who lose a child end up divorcing. So it's not surprising there was conflict, but there's been some mediation, and most of that has been worked out. I mean, nobody ever gets as much of a loved child as they want, but I think it's been worked out fairly equitably so that Bobbie Jo's mother does have time with the child and is a part of her life.
Oh, that's great. I wanted to also talk, you did include 6 other examples of very similar murder, and we did talk about the one involving a lady named Effie. But maybe you could tell us, just briefly, give us some of the other examples, because there are a couple examples that are at least as bad or even worse than this. And again, why did you feel compelled to include those in this story? I mean, I think I have a good idea, but just for our audience, might be curious, why would you have included these? And give us a brief background just on a couple of these.
Well, I didn't include it to be salacious, which is what I think some people thought. I included it because I had been so ignorant before I came to this case that I didn't know that this was happening. And I didn't want anyone else to walk away from this book thinking this is once-in-a-lifetime thing. Because one thing I learned from the experts I talked to was that women needed to take steps to protect themselves. So they needed to know about more of these cases, to know that it did happen before. This wasn't the only time. And they needed to be careful and needed to be cautious and listen to their instincts about people and protect themselves. So, it was an educational thing for me, and I was essentially sharing that education with others. I mean, that's how I saw it from the beginning. And there were some cases where you feel bad for someone being so disillusioned, but then you see what they do. Like this emergency room technician, she was like 31 years old. She'd been divorced. She was a cancer survivor, that because of the cancer, she had to lose her baby-producing capability when they performed a hysterectomy, and she attempted to adopt 3 times and could never succeed in that. So it seemed like the answer to prayer when her unmarried niece got pregnant and said she could adopt the child. But then the niece changed her mind, and she said that she was going to keep her baby, and, that was that. And so Aaron decided to take the baby away from her before it was born. And that was what she did. And it ended up that the baby died as well, and so no one got anything positive out of that. But it was, there are just so many horrible cases. Michelle Bicca, who decorated a room, bought tons of baby clothes, installed a monitor, told her husband she was pregnant. They toured birth facilities together and talked about the baby's future, and you make all sorts of plans. And she went just a short distance away from her home to another woman's house, claiming she was interested in the Jeep they had advertised for sale, and she pulled out a handgun and shot the woman in the back. And she was killed instantly, and she removed the baby boy and buried the mother. It's just horrible loss of life for the stupidest, selfish reasons.
Yeah, it seems incredible that the book Baby Me Mine is an incredible story, and you would think this would be a very rare occurrence. And when you put in 6 other occurrences that are equally as bizarre, you come to realize that this is a new frightening menace. It's another new aspect. There's serial killers, and then there's serial killers that want to contact the media, and then there's now this phenomena.
And there have been more cases since Lisa Montgomery committed this crime.
Yeah.
There was one case where the killer cut open the woman's body with a car key.
Yes. Oh, incredible.
It's just horrible. But and what was shocking to me is someone like Lisa Montgomery, who has actually given birth before, who understands what it's like to have a baby in your own body, and that she could commit a crime like this is far more appalling to me than someone who's never had a child, because they don't completely get it.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to ask you, how did working on this story affect you? Just basically the last question. How did working on this story affect you?
This was the most difficult book I've written, and I think a lot of reason for that is that I had a daughter about the same age as Bobbie Jo, and it was easy to think, oh my God, what if it was my daughter, and if I found her body like that, and the whole thing kind of it tore me up, and I talked to her mother on the phone several times, but every time we talked, she'd try to answer a question and break into tears, and she was choking and she couldn't talk to me. Ended up, I got all the information from her secondhand from her close friend, because she was not able to even talk about it. It devastated her life. It devastated so many people in Skidmore and people in the rat terrier community that knew and loved Bobbie Jo. The impact of this crime went so far. And you look at Bobbie Jo, and it seemed like anyone who knew her liked her, loved her. She was just a sweet, wonderful young woman. And she's gone.
Yes, and the only upshot is the child, but it's going to be a difficult and an incredible time when that fate of her mother is explained to her.
And she has been robbed of someone who would have probably been a wonderful mother.
Well, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you, Diane. I just wanted to, for our audience's sake, if you have a website, if you could give us your website address.
Yes, it's www.dianefanning.com. And I have sample chapters of all my books on there, so they can go and read and see which one interests them.
And you have, this is the 10th book published by St. Martin's Press. This had come out in 2006, I believe, and it's called A Baby Be Mine, an incredible book. And I want to thank you very much, Diane, for a very informative program, and thank you so much for being so generous to come on and talk about this incredible story and your equally incredible book.
It was a pleasure to talk with you, Dan. Good luck with your radio show.
Well, thank you very much, Dan, and I hope to talk to you again soon. Have a good night.
Hope so. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, and next week's guest is Don Lasseter, and he's the author of Die For Me, the horrifying story of sadistic killer partners Leonard Lake and Charles Ng, who, inspired by a fictional book called The Collector, abducted women, imprisoning them in a homemade dungeon, torturing, raping, and murdering them, all the while videotaping their ghastly deeds. It is an incredible story, and Die For Me, an amazing book. The following week is Kathy Scott, author of The Rough Guide to True Crime. After that is Nick Prawn, author of Lethal Marriage, the case of Canada's Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, one of the most shocking cases of all time. And if you're not familiar with this case in this book, all I can say is, wow, check this interview out definitely. That's Lethal Marriage by Nick Prawn. Incredible story. In the following weeks, Catherine Casey, author of Descent into Hell, will be appearing on the program, and a woman named Maura Martingale, author of an incredible book called Cannibal Killers, will be discussing her book. In March, we'll have Philip Carlo making an appearance talking about Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Also in March, Stevie Cameron, author of The Picton Files, the story behind Willie Picton and his trial. Again, one of the most shocking serial killers of all time. If you haven't heard of Willie Picton, go to Crime Library and check it out. Incredible. Also in March, Terry Sullivan, the prosecuting attorney who successfully investigated and prosecuted and wrote the definitive book about John Wayne Gacy. Sometime down the road after that, Sue Russell, author of Lethal Intent, the story behind female serial killer Aileen Wuornos, the subject of Oscar-winning movie Monster. She'll be appearing on the program. So we have a bevy of incredible authors talking about their books about some of the most shocking killers in true crime history. So that's every week, 8 o'clock here on Blog Talk Radio, Central Standard Time, 8 o'clock live, and anytime on demand on Blog Talk Radio. So you've been listening to the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. I will talk to you next time.